I always tell people just to have a great plan. Don't be in a rush. Have a plan and execute the plan and stick to it. Be very disciplined because there's a lot of people that aren't disciplined and they'll get burnt. I'm always a stickler for quality over quantity. And if a deal does not meet like the numbers, I walk away from it. I do not try to make the deal work itself or get the numbers. When you do underwriting, you can make anything work by fudging numbers. Like, yeah,
of course. Yeah.
Our emotions are into it. You have to be having rational thinking of like, what is it right now?
You found the Real Estate Law Podcast. Because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. If you're a real estate professional or looking to build real estate expertise, then welcome to the conversation and discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com.
Welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Law Podcast. Jason Muth and Rory Guild here. Rory with Next Home Titletown Real Estate and Urban Village Legal in Boston. Rory, we're headed back to Philadelphia. I know we spoke to you, Bazogany, a couple episodes ago out of Philly, and we love Philly. So we went down to Philly. We found ourselves a great person who could speak about overcoming adversity in the real estate journey and turning into fortunes, like, big time investing, great attitude, and learning from, some speed bumps along the way that we all have and how that's turned into, quite a real estate endeavor for our guests.
And I know, Jason, you warmed up today very literally just about an hour ago. You came across a bunch of lemons, so you made lemonade. So that's sort of the theme of today. When life gives you lemons, turn it to lemonade and see everything kind of as an opportunity here. So, Jason, I see you're prepared for today. So can you introduce our guest?
Yes, I will explain the lemon to lemonade in a second, but let's introduce Noel Parnell out of Philadelphia. Noel, welcome to the Real Estate Law Podcast.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Noel's company is Crown Capital. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
We can't wait to hear about some of the deals that you've been working on lately and some of the challenges that you've faced over your career. We were just talking before we hit record, you're a trained scientist, a pro athlete. You need to hear about both those things first and then kind of how you moved into real estate. Rory was just alluding to making lemonade out of lemons because I have far too many lemons from some staging projects that we've done for some of our short-term rentals. And I'm like, you know what? I need to do something with these things because they're going to go rotten and I don't like wasting anything. So I just cut them open and literally made lemonade out of lemons. So that is the theme for today, right?
Absolutely.
Noel, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. I had a track scholarship down to LSU. Wanted to play football, ended up transferring to Crossville City in Baton Rouge, Southern University. Graduated with a BS in biology. Then I went to Run Pro, which is an adventure itself. So I went 100 meters, and after 4 years of training, in 10 seconds, I was up, and I was like, man, what's next? Like, my 4-year dream was over in under 10 seconds, and I was like, I didn't make an Olympic team. What now? I ended up getting selected to help a Paralympian. So I ended up going to the Beijing Olympic Games, helping a Paralympian who's blind. We're tethered together, so our hands are tethered together, and I'm a mirror image of him. And I kind of use what I learned from him now with my investors that, I didn't get to live out my dream, but I was blessed enough to help someone else live out their dreams, actually run in the Olympics, and look to run for Olympic gold, in his event. And so I kind of use that type of analogy with my investors, so I'm trying to help them, achieve financial well-being, vitality, or independence, so I kind of look as we're tethered together and we're partnering in this. After that, went to work at GSK. There's another lesson here. My stepmother and my dad were like, well, you didn't make the Olympic team, what now? And, came back from the Beijing Games and I was like, all right, I got to get a job. They were like, you need to work. I was 27 years old. I had plenty enough time to try out for 2012. So, my next nugget is like, don't let someone else's fears be, imposed on you. It wasn't that they didn't believe in me. They were just scared. It was their fear of what their norm was of, my dad retired from Merck Pharmaceuticals, so he worked there for over, 30 years. And he was like, well, this is what you should do. Go get in there, get your good 401k. It wasn't a gold watch, but he gave a spill where you get the gold watch at the end. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? I was 27 years old. I had another shot to go ahead and try out for the 2012 Olympics. Hindsight is there, but I did learn a lesson about not letting someone else's fear, be imposing on me. Stay true to who you are.
Yeah. Wow. So you're from a family of scientists, and then you also had this, little curveball that you're a fantastic athlete too, if you're trying out for the Olympics. And I bet, when you didn't make a team, your parents are probably saying, okay, Noel, like, let's, now it's time to go to work, right? Now go get that job. All right. You're done with that Olympic stuff. Like, and then, you're looking back saying, I could have done it one more time. Right. But, hey, you had a moment with the Paralympian that you worked with. And, it sounds like you learned a lot from that. You had an Olympic experience, which, not many of us in this world have. What was it like to be in that stadium with all those people?
Oh, electric. This to be, the stadium is beautiful. Open ceremonies was amazing. If anyone remembers it from back in 2008, it was an amazing open ceremonies. All the athletes were nice. You're pretty much involved with all the athletes except for basketball. They got to stay in the village. Those team members had their own hotels, but everybody else, you're like, you're right around each other. So that was a great, moment for me. Back in the White House visit. So the White House visit was actually great. My fun fact there, I always tell people is that like Bush, who was president at the time, he's like funny as hell, man. He was like really laid back, jokes. He was like the guy that you should probably hang out at the bar with, whatever. And it's just like, you got a lot of crap, but I was like, I would hang out with you. You're funny, man.
Yeah.
You're so chill.
Well, he's probably happy to see some, athletes representing the country instead of like, some other politicians screaming at him all the time. I'm sure all politicians would love to be able to welcome you guys into the White House like that. So Noel just switched over to his computer with some technical difficulties with your phone. Your phone just died. That's what happens. But so you were talking about working for GSK as a scientist, and then you got laid off from that job. Is that when you found your way into the world of real estate investing?
Yes. And it was by chance that I was a bench scientist in genetics working at RTP, North Carolina, business as usual, kind of following what my dad said, going to the pharma world. I didn't go to Merck on purpose because I wanted to make a name for myself. So that's how I ended up at GSK. I didn't, I was probably too proud there. I was like, you know what, go to GSK. And one day we get a call, like everybody come down to, it's the Eli Hitchens building. Anybody from North Carolina, the building looks like a beehive. Some of you may recall this if you've ever been there. And they were like, we are closing this building down. And I was like, what does that mean? So this is like my first kind of real job, going. And I was like, what the hell? What does this mean for me? And so instincts kicked in. And I was like, I need to find shelter. And I was like, all right. So I was like, all right, where am I going to live? And then I was angry. I was angry at the world. I was like, how can they just do this to everybody? Someone's just going to just, I was just me. There were husbands, wives, people with children. And this is my first kind of experience being laid off. Not my last, but it was like my first one. I'm like, what the hell? And I was like, all right, how did the rich get rich? This is like my Google search. How did the rich get rich? And it came up some like stat. It was like 90, I think at like that time, it's like 92% of wealth was created through real estate. That's what spearheaded me going to real estate. And I still laugh about this to the day. I was going to Barnes and Nobles and I would go to the section, like the real estate section, and I was bookmarking, taking notes. And I was like, I could have purchased the book, but, real estate is kind of less sexy back then, because the whole crash and everything like that. So I was like, I'll just take these notes. I was being very frugal. And I kind of giggle at this. I'm like, I could have bought the books. The books were like $9.95. I had $9.95 they provide. But literally, I came there every day just taking notes in my notebook and just studying real estate. The Gary Keller's book, about real estate that he had out at the time, and like real estate for dummies. And what I learned from that is, one, I don't want to be an agent. I was like, I want to be an investor. And then I was like, all right, I have no money, any significant amount of money, which also triggered, how can I get into my next Google? How do I buy a home with little or no money. And that's where I got the owner financing came up. And I started learning about subject to deals later on down the line. So that taught me a lesson itself. So I went almost about 3 to 4 years, yearly knocking on doors, looking for a deal. And so what I would do is that I would go to my city's website. Every city has it where they give like tax foreclosures and mortgage foreclosures. And if let's say we're in May right now, and if I seen that a auction was coming up in September, I would target those homes. Now, this taught me a really important lesson about empathy, because I'm just knocking on somebody's door. Hey, give me your house.
Right.
Nobody wants to lose their house because they couldn't pay their bill or it's a tax bill. I had no tact, no empathy. I was an asshole. When I think about it, I was just only thinking about myself. Not thinking about the impact of a man or a woman like losing their home, their where their memories are at, or guess what? Maybe their parents' home where they grew up at. It was totally unempathetic. And from there, I created a different system where I would say, my first option is like, how can I help you? How can I help you keep your property? How can I help you keep the property in your name or in your family's name? Then number 2, how can we partner together? And then number 3, you can sell it to me. Or number 4, we just depart cordially. I noticed that I never I stopped discussing business at the door. I would invite people out to lunch or coffee. And I would say, hey, you should get a free meal out of it, coffee out of it. And we'll just do it that way. And then if you don't want to do it, at least you got a free, latte. Don't worry about it. You got free latte, you got good conversation.
Are they thinking like, who is this guy knocking on my door? I'm in a bad situation. The bank sent me a letter. They're going to foreclose upon me. Now here's this guy that wants to buy me a coffee.
Correct. And you'd be surprised, even with that, the empathy and the kind of more tact, some people went down with the ship. There are a lot of folks that went down with the ship and like, hey, and that was their choice. Most part, I would always try to target homes that were in distress, but they had an upside to it. So I'm really big into metrics and methodology. So I would like to target properties that I can either add some value to, and that the ARV would be no less than about 65% of the ARV. Let's say that very correctly. That the buying it as is and putting any value add into, and that means at this time it was me like my own sweat equity. That means I'm doing the painting, I'm placing in the vanities. It wasn't any like heavy renovations where I was doing electric work. So it had to be kind of a niche product that I knew that, guess what, I can go ahead and refi, and I would be all about 65% into it. And I chose that metric because I knew banks at the time were lending, at that time, they started lending around like 80%. I always felt that was aggressive and I would over leverage myself. So I would only take out 70%. So I was giving myself like a 5% cushion where I wasn't completely over leveraged, but I know I could take a product to the bank and they were like, you know what, DCSR and everything like that, your debt service, it's cash flowing. This will make sense here. We'll go ahead and refi you out. And I would give a portion that money or all that money to the former owner itself as compensation. For me, I was looking for a long-term wealth and passive income. So I was always looking like the asset itself and what it can bring later on. Certain things I could have done a little bit differently on how I structured things. But overall, it put me in a great position to where I am right now.
For those early deals, I just want to ask, how you're structuring them. Are you doing traditional financing? Are you doing creative financing, subject twos, owner financing? How are those first deals? How do they actually look?
So I laughed at that when you asked that, only because I know you're a law degree. And my first contract, I still laugh at this right now. When I got the first yes, I was like, great. I didn't have a contract. So I Googled things that sounded right from about every state. Please, disclaimer, do not do this. Get a professional to write you a contract. And I was like, oh, this sounds good. This is from like Oregon. This is from like Memphis. I was Googling and pasted everything and I thought it sounded good. I was like, all right, this is great. I gave it to them and they were like none the wiser. And they were like, all right, cool. And this is on a subject to deal. And it actually worked out at the end of the day. But I giggle at that of the horrible contract that I did. It was horrible. But the I guess get back to the deal. It was a subject to deal. So I had pretty much two in parallel. I had a gentleman named Joe Dixon. They gave me my first solar financing deal. And we did this on a property that he was just retiring. And he just really did me a solid just because I kept coming around to like different events. And he was like, you know what? This is what I'll do for you on this property. The property was only about $45,000. The tenant that he had in there was there for about 16 years. And he was like, hey, I will still finance this for you for 7%. And so I paid him 7%. It was already cash flowing. And then I actually, it ballooned to 36 months. And so I had enough time there. And so I had used his agreement for all my later solar financing deals, because again, I still didn't really understand, and I wasn't really savvy enough to be like, hey, let me hire a lawyer. And with the subject to deal, kind of heard the story of that. I just put stuff together. And this was actually a disgruntled, she wasn't even disgruntled. He was just tired of landlording. You know, I probably spent more money on the property getting it evaluated than I did on closing costs. Because I couldn't believe like these old folks that should give me the property. And I was like, where are they? Gremlins or something at night? Like, what's going on? Like, it can't be this sweet of a deal.
Yeah. You just never know everyone's situation. I mean, like, you know, sometimes they're just done. They're tired. They're moved on. There's a situation in their life that maybe they're getting divorced. Maybe there's an illness in the family. Maybe they have to move. Maybe something's going on with their kid. You know, like we're all at different points in our lives. And, you know, you mentioned something about how can I, you know, getting your empathy and figuring out how can I help you is something that you weaved into your conversation versus early on, which is basically give me your house. That seems like that's probably a good idea. I mean, if you're listening to this in a similar situation to where Noel was, you know, with a job transition, moving into real estate investing capacity, you know, literally knocking on doors and doing some research to see, you know, what's coming up, you know, with some legal issues that the city's bringing forward or banks are bringing forward. You're out there saying, you know, I want to help you guys now. And you learn that along the way because you were in a bad situation where you got laid off from your job and you're like, how do I, you know, these people are kind of in that same situation, but bringing the empathy into this conversation is smart, and bringing attorneys into it also sounds like a good idea too. And I think it sounds like you've done that later on in your career, right?
Yes, I always have. I have a great Lee Shomlitz. Shout out to him in Philadelphia. That is my personal real estate attorney. I always pay him to kind of think for me and keep me out of trouble. And so he does all my agreements and all my contracts right now. I got lucky on that one. Just to be honest, I got lucky on that one. I really didn't truly understand on the subject to deals, the due on sell clause, and really letting that owner know like what could have happened to that property if it was actually PNC Bank would have known that we transferred that deed of ownership without paying that mortgage. And so, you know, I got lucky on that. You know, I have no other explanation on it that I just got lucky on it. I was paying the mortgage as in, you know, so they still got paid the mortgage. That mortgage was only like, at the time, it was $434 principal, P&I, and escrow. And at that time, the tenants were paying $875. So I was still cash flowing a little over $300 from the single family home. It was great. She only owed like $24,000 left on the mortgage. And I milked that property for like cash out refis, you know, but it was well worth of a $175. You know, so I took 75 here and went to other products, but I got lucky on that one. Please use a lawyer. I got lucky.
Yeah. But also, isn't it crazy how a small little property like that can become a piggy bank, you know, if you do it correctly? Pulling money out of it, you know, at the right times and not going to Atlantic City, you're pulling money out of it and you're putting it into other, you know, cash flowing and appreciating properties. Where I want to throw a question to Rory in a second, but I just want to ask, where is that property now? Do you still own it?
I still do. 215 North Creighton Street. I still own it. I actually listed for sale this year though, because I'm trying to do a 1031. So I had 3 single families left in my portfolio, and I want to put that into a 12 unit. So it actually is listed for sale right now.
All right. Okay. Rory, something that Noel mentioned was the due on sale clause, and you and I have talked about that a lot because we're investigating, you know, subject to deals, and we're saying you know, people have varying levels of comfort with sub 2. Rory, talk about the due on sale clause, what Noel just mentioned right
Well, one of the disadvantages of being an attorney is we're trained to always look out for the problems, and we just kind of see potential problems everywhere, which makes us a little risk averse in anything that we want to invest in. But the way it's written, there's a due on sale clause in just about every mortgage in the United States, which means that once a property is sold, the mortgage is supposed to be due upon that sale. And the whole subject to investing strategy relies in some degree on tricking the bank into not realizing that the transfer has happened, and kind of concealing that transfer at least long enough such that the buyer, the investor buyer, can either sell it themselves or refinance out of the property. And there are a lot of risks with that, because if the due on sale clause is triggered by the bank, rarely happens, but it can be pretty disastrous to both the original seller, whose credit is still at stake, and to the buyer, whose interest in investment is at stake. So that's where, we can kind of laugh at that everything turned out well now, but particularly for these seller financing and subject to deals, you want to make sure that you have a good contract in place, and everything buttoned up as best you can. And, I call them Franken leases. I've seen them where people go in, they're looking to create a lease off what they can find online. They grab bits and pieces of different leases they see in other states. Also make your lease state specific. States are very different in how they do things and how they word things. So keep that in mind.
Sounds a lot like Noel's early contracts, where he was piecing them together.
Now on the head, I was like, guilty as charged here.
Yeah.
It is, it's funny you said it, because it is different from state to state. Some title companies won't do this type of deal. So sometimes you have to find a title company that's willing to do it. I did one in Texas for a 20 unit, and that was done strictly through attorneys. So the attorneys structured everything in Texas for me for this. It's a subject to deal on a 20 unit building, and they structured everything, which I was extremely happy to, pay them their retainer. Now, that's done. Now the hard part, not the hard part, but the work comes to finding another vehicle to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. Rory, you had a question?
No, I was going to say, you've come a long way since these first deals that were, stitched together, and, we're talking about the errors, but those really did kind of get your foot in the door that allowed you to kind of build the empire that you have today. When did you set your sights a little bit higher and turn from a small investor into Crown Capital?
That turned once I achieved financial independence. And this is around 2015, 2016, where I purchased enough properties where I started exceeding my W-2. And my former colleagues still laugh. I probably gave the longest 2 weeks in history, about 2.5, 3 months that I gave, because I wanted to score up everything. And this is at Shiat Tech, or the pharma company I was at. And doing that, I was like, all right, I achieved this. Now what's next? What do you want to do? And I was really pondering that I never had a bad job. I wasn't disgruntled. I didn't hate my boss. Really what I wanted was free will over my life. I was still burned from my first layoff, where I felt someone had the power over my livelihood. And I was still scoring about that. So I just never wanted someone to have that power of my livelihood. And I think the scale up came, I was like, what do you truly want? What do you really want to do? Do you want to go to pharmacy school, which still in the back of my head to go back and, get a doctorate at pharmacy? But I was like, ultimately I want to buy into a sports team, whether that's baseball, hockey, or football, which is a little bit harder to be minority stake. But I needed to increase my net worth, and that's still the goal to stay. And that's why I got into the apartment building of apartment building and purchasing, is that I'm just increasing my net worth to actually do bigger deals, increasing my net worth to ultimately, I have a goal 15 years from now to actually buy into a sports team as a minority owner. Hopefully it's a Philadelphia team, but, the ultimate goal is to buy into a sports team itself. And that's how Crown Capital was developed. I just needed kind of to expedite really my trajectory. And I couldn't do it, I like to say, just kind of doing, 4 units and 5 units and 6 units. I had to play bigger at this time.
Mm-hmm. No. And I'm going to give you maybe kind of a a layup question here. But without doing those first deals, those single families, would you have been able to jump into the bigger apartments?
I love these questions. So I would say, I would say yes or no. I'll go with ham, chicken, or egg. So yes or no. I would say yes, I would have, because I want to quote one of my favorite books. It's the Who, Not How. And it's like, all right, you don't need to figure out how to do something. You might need to connect with who to do it. So I could have connected with other fund managers. Like LinkedIn's that's my wheelhouse. I know a lot of people do Twitter and Instagram. I love LinkedIn. I think the folks that I want to network with are on LinkedIn for the most part, which I call business professionals. I think I could have went right there and found what I needed. But then I will say no, is that I love that I was in the weeds. I love that I got to pull behind the curtain, because I know how everything works. And there's something to be said about that. Like when I do a lot of asset management now of our buildings, and where I'll hear contractors or the property manager rattle off this number, and I'm like, that math does not make sense. I know the square footage of this. That doesn't. Where are you skewing numbers at, or where are you kind of inflating numbers? So I know that level of business there. I'd say hindsight. At that time, I needed the single family homes. I think with the amount of information that is currently out here from real investors, and I say that with an asterisk, because there's great marketing out here where people are taking advantage of people. There's all types of schemes out there. So always bet the people you're dealing with, whether they're mentors or whatever groups you're going into, just be very careful. But there's so much information out here right now for anyone that I think, yes, I could do it currently at this time. I could have went into a multifamily, right away. I had $100,000 and I split it up. I was like, oh, I'll split it 5 ways, 20 into like small homes. I could have did that at that time, in a small, like 12 unit.
Yeah.
But I would say right now, in this present time, it's so much information. Like someone can definitely do it right now.
The world that we're in now, I left my W-2 last year. They told me to leave, which is fine, because I was going to leave anyway. And we've been doing short-term rentals ourselves. Rory's got his businesses. So, we started investing in 2016. So like we kind of have this nice sliding transition, not like a break point. But I've been talking to a lot of people lately that kind of see what I'm doing and the transition that I made very easily and quickly, because it was seamless, because we've already been mindset-wise in the real estate investing space for 7 years at this point. But I talk to people that they're like in their job and they want to stop doing it. They want to start investing. Like, so what kind of advice would you give to somebody that's in that position right now? Like they're late 30s, early 40s, they're in that job, they might get laid off, or they want to leave, they have some responsibilities, they have a little bit of money to saved up, they probably have some equity in their house, and they want to try real estate investing, all right? But they don't want to make that break point right now on their own. Like, what would they do? What should they do?
Education. Read as many books as you can, YouTube, podcasts, listen. But then also be very methodical. I was going to ask you this question as well, since you left your W-2, because I know how I did mine. I first wanted to know about financial independence. Like, what do I need to keep my lights on, food in the house, mortgage, gas tank? I knew what number I needed. And once I knew what number I needed, I knew how many doors I had to achieve. And I was like, oh, check, milestone. Now I'm going to, I guess, what I call financial vitality. And for that financial vitality, I'm saying, all right, well, I want to enjoy myself. So I'm kind of planning out, like, what vacations do I want to, where do I want to go? What type of car? Right now, I want a fancier car. So I'm getting very granular on like the sweeter things in life that I want. So I would always tell people, be very, very specified in what your wants and your needs and what your number is. Sometimes I'll ask people like, how much money do you want? $1 million. All right. Do you really want $1 million? And you're just throwing it out there. Like, go through what you really want out of life. And I guarantee 9 times out of 10, their number's a lot smaller than what they think it is. It's because they weren't being very granular. And then once you have that, you can kind of work the plan backwards and say, guess what? I need to obtain this. I could obtain this in like year 1. All right. Okay. Now I see this from the rental income. and I had this for year 2 to place down. And so I always tell people just to have a great plan. Don't be in a rush. Have a plan and execute the plan and stick to it. Be very disciplined, because there's a lot of people that aren't disciplined and they'll get burnt. I'm always a stickler for quality over quantity. And if a deal does not meet like the numbers, I walk away from it. I do not try to make the deal work itself or work at the numbers. When you're doing underwriting, you can make anything work by fudging numbers. Like,
of course. Yeah.
Our emotions are into it. You have to be having rational thinking of like, what is it right now? Because you don't want to find yourself in trouble because you were overreaching on, your magic ball. Like, yes, rents can go up 20% here. I have never, even in the peak, I'd never raised my rents. I was still on a 2 to 3% rent escalator all the time. And even with that, I never predicted COVID, which I was doggy paddling. We didn't even talk about that right there.
No, we didn't.
I was glad I had a degree because I took consulting jobs. I took other jobs working a W-2, and there's no shame in that, because I've seen sometimes on marketing, there's people are shaming people working W-2s. Like, what is that? It's an honorable job. What is it? Cool to work honorable and living. But my W-2 saved my properties. I had no foreclosures. I live in a tenant-friendly city, and so the eviction memorandums went down. My mortgages are auto-debited every month, the first of every month. But what I had to do, I had to go ahead and say, guess what? Let me go work and make sure I keep these things afloat.
I think that real estate investors are great at figuring out a way, whatever that means, figuring out a way. All right, here's the situation that's being dealt to me. I love it or it sucks. Let me figure out a way to, embellish the situation or get out of the situation, right? Like, COVID caused a lot of eviction moratoriums, right? So there was a lot of rent not getting paid to people like you, and the banks were still asking for their money. You looked at the situation, you said, well, let me figure this out. Like in our situation, we had 2 short-term rentals at the time, and the calendars that were full became totally unbooked. So suddenly I have like vacant summers, which is when we're supposed to make a lot of our money in these properties. And I was like, all right, well, what do we do? And we just, sat back and waited a little bit. And then suddenly things started, kind of reopening and coming back to a degree. I had a situation last year where, I wasn't able to close on a home equity line of credit on one of our investment properties because I didn't get it closed before my job ended. So I said, all right, well, that sucks. I called the bank and said, we're at the finish line. I'm about to pass papers, literally appraisal, everything. And I just couldn't close it. And they said, yeah, if you don't have the W-2, we can't underwrite this now. I'm like, okay, well, I'll figure something out. Right. And, I said to Rory, I'm like, I don't know, we'll find a way to tap the money if we need it. But, for now, let's just let it sit there. Right. I'll find a way. And sure enough, lots of investigation as the year goes on. And then we looked at the rest of our portfolio and we found a way to get the assets out that we needed for the next investment. That's what real estate investors do, right? You're very creative. And, people don't like taking no for an answer, and they don't like a bad situation that they can't really, come out of favorably. So it shows a level of creativity that real estate investors have, when we're facing these kind of situations.
Absolutely. I get asked that all the time that, do I feel like my degree is going to waste? And I was like, I have great conceptual thinking. So when I was doing, chemical kinetics, you have to figure out a way out. So I kind of look at real estate the same way. I'm just kind of like, all right, let me figure out what to do with this problem that we have here. And I didn't make this up, but it's another investor. He's like, you only lose in real estate when you run out of time or money, like Las Vegas. You run out of time or money, then the bad things happen right there. But as long as you can keep the time and the money going, you'll be fine. One thing I want to pinpoint on you, where you're saying like, the home equity line, I had a hard lesson on that as well, that when I left my W-2, I didn't realize I wasn't filing business taxes. So those same loans that I was getting when I had my W-2 was the same pace. They were like, well, where's your 2 years of business taxes here now that you're this, you're self-employed? I'm like, I never knew. I could have made that transition a lot easier for myself because I was getting predatory loans where they were like, all right, this interest rate is like 9%. And I'm just like, 9%? It was like, well, yeah, you don't have any 2 years of tax returns. You know, you're using your W-2 for it. And so that was another lesson learned too. Of I just didn't know that I was going to need that on my transition time.
Yeah. We'll probably have to figure that part out, Rory. I mean, I know that our LLCs are pass-through entities, right? You know, so we're filing that along with our personal taxes. I don't know. You do that.
Most of them, not all of them. Depends on how you have it structured and who's involved. But
yeah, you bring up a really good. If you're going to want to get credit as a business, you're going to have to show a history of having done this. I did get some credit on one of our commercial properties this past year. I had to, show multiple years of tax returns. We had to get, CPAs to take a look at everything. Like, it was a little bit more involved than I had expected.
Yeah. I mean, even with the banking terms now, I did it's a small multi-unit, 5-unit that I got this for my son. This might be for another. My son has just turned 1, but I got him. I've been buying him buildings since he's been born. But it's a 5-unit that I got, and the bank, CNN Bank, they were like, all right, it meets all the requirements, DSCR, but still, we want to hold $20,000 back in reserves in a money market account, where it's like, you're just holding my money back to lend it out, or you're doing something with my money.
Right.
And we're just going to hold it for a year just to make sure, like, your DCSCR stays above a 1.2. And I was just like, all right. So they gave me half of my cash out refi, and the other half they're just holding. And so I was just like, yeah, it's just really interesting. And they did that within 24 hours of closing. They raised my interest rate up a point, and they told me they were holding it back within 24 hours.
At the very end of, so you're about to sign, and you signed it, and you're ready to go, and then they changed the terms?
May 5th. It was closing. May 3rd, to be really exact, is where my banker called me and was like, hey, you're not going to like this, but this is what they're coming back with. We're going up on the interest rate, and we're going to hold back this money.
Yeah. Is that, Murray, do you think that's happening a lot more these days with banks? I mean, I feel like there's been a lot of curveballs toward the very end that we've experienced lately as well.
I mean, certainly, within the commercial space, banks have a lot more leeway to change things and do things all the way up until closing. But even in the residential space, they're in some ways they're trying to get you the lowest rate, which sometimes ends up with a lot of these like deep dives into your personal finances that are becoming deeper and more complicated and more cumbersome, and a lot less appealing to people who are investors with multiple properties. The terms are also starting to become more and more unusual, which can be a little bit of a red flag in the macro sense. But I've seen rates with 6-month adjustable terms, which is just crazy, when just a couple years ago, even investors were always getting 30-year fixed.
Yeah. Things were so consistent for so long. We had a decade of BRRRR being a good strategy, right? Where you could buy something and refinance, and you can't do that anymore right now. People are doing other stuff.
I would say BRRRR's dead. I think BRRRR's dead unless you're just buying it at such a cheap price. I don't think BRRRR's alive right now. Because you can have a great property, but at the interest rate, can you cover your debt service? Like, is it going to be there? So to your point, I think BRRRR's a little bit dead right now.
Maybe BRRRR's on hold. I don't know. I'd hope it's not dead. Like, it seems it's a great strategy, right? But I think
the interest rate
we just need
so
to.
Low.
Yeah, they're so low, and
and when you look at time, and I would say, like, we had a sweet spot. Maybe our time was the anomaly. When you look at other interest rates in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they were all, pretty much higher than, 7%. And then we had this era of 10 years where we're floating at 2-3%. I know some people that got like a 1.78. I'm like, never saw that sucker. Like,
oh my God,
there. But maybe we're going into where rates should have been traditionally. We were just that sweet year was just the anomaly, and now we're actually adjusting, and maybe the part of our economic problems that we're having now is because we stayed in that sweet spot for such a long time. It was over 12 years. It was, it was a great run. A great.
Well, before I get to my final questions, maybe I should transition into a question of like, well, where is things headed? Like, what is your strategy now, for the back half of the year and into next year and beyond, knowing that sweet spot of 12, 13 years where, BRRRR was the thing to do, that's gone. What's on your plate going forward?
Buckling down on operations. I really want to make sure I'm squeezing everything out of my operations. That means I'm really paying attention to how my buildings are being ran, at a finer lens than I was previously. So I'm looking at, late fees. I'm looking at how can we decrease like water expenditures? Can we build back to tenants? I'm using a multifamily RUBS company. They're nationwide. That's helping me build back to tenants. We're building back trash and pest control. I'm looking at solar lights for the buildings to keep those common electric down. Because other than that, unless you're in a fixed rate right now, you're really just trying to level on your expenses because taxes they're always going up. Your insurance, insurance used to be sometimes between $300-$400 a door. Insurance premiums now are through the roof right now, where I'm seeing anywhere between $500 to $700 a door now on the larger scale. But even on the smaller stuff, insurance rates have gone up as far as the premiums. They're going up across the board right now. And so like those are going to be like constant expenses that you're going to have. So I have to double down on my operating and just really making sure my management company is kind of laying an iron fist. We're getting multiple bids on items for the current buildings. For the new buildings, I'm looking at mostly now when we buy them, the strategy has changed because banks aren't really lending on value. They're lending at DSCR. And so most of that DSCRs, some banks want like a 1.4, or 1.35, and traditionally it was 1.2 or 1.25 minimum. And, when I'm hearing a 1.4, they're like really, doubling down on that. And even with your loan to values, most of them now are 55 to 65% loan to value. Those are the quotes I'm getting. Rates are still around on the commercial side. I'm seeing anywhere from between 5.4 to 5.8, but it's really kind of the debt service that they want. And then also the cash reserves, the amount of cash reserves they want post closing. And that's something that I'm looking at because like I'll put my own money into a deal and I may be low, but I'm like, all right, I'll come back later. They're like, no, some folks wanted, $400,000, $500,000 liquid after I close. And I was like, oh man, I'm not going to have that if I'm placing this into my deal as well. So those are some of the things that I have to really like strategize right now. And I'm fine tuning that right now, to be honest. I'm navigating how this, new banking world is going. I'm one of the people that were with First Republic. And so I was kind of like, oh my goodness, what's going on? I had, refis going on with First Republic and I had an account with First Republic, so when all that was going down, I'm like, well, where's my money go? What's going on with my refis? It was so many unknowns. And right now I'm just kind of fine tuning my methodologies of moving forward.
Well, it sounds like you're a customer of JP Morgan Chase now, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, like, they're a massive bank. I work with them as well. But, you bring up a great point about operation. Real estate investing is a business, right? And sometimes people forget that. Even if you only have one property that used to be your home that you're now renting out to somebody else, even if it's just your one vacation home that you rent out for a few weeks or more than a few weeks on the side, treat it like a business, treat everything like a business. And sometimes that means, check out your expenses, get multiple bids, be empathetic and lenient when you need to be. But, if you're being taken advantage of by your tenants, you need to charge them for whatever it is. It'd be fair with what you're increasing. If insurance and taxes are going up, well, the rent should go up too, right? So, treat it like a business, exactly like you're doing. And I think kind of not retracting is probably the wrong word, but reevaluating your current portfolio in an environment like this is probably a really smart thing. Rory and I are actually doing that now. Like I don't think we're going to make an acquisition this year because we kind of want to reinvest in we want to take a look at our properties right now and see exactly what we could do to improve those properties. This is a good year to do that, right? It's a good year to just take a pause, see what you got, make those repairs you need to, any deferred maintenance or anything that needs to get done to make it look better. And then don't jump into a deal that's a bad deal just to jump into a deal.
That's what I'm on right now too. Good. Yeah, I like that.
Good. Rory, before we get to our final questions, any final thoughts for Noel?
We had a pretty good back and forth here, and not to make everything current, but I can kind of see the trajectory that you're on right now to where we are, and then what advice you're giving. So, and anybody who's out there, nobody can see the future, but I would definitely take a good solid listen to what Noel had to say.
And I still agree about kind of standing on your operations and not acquiring something unless it's like a really golden goose egg type of deal. But there's going to be lots of deals coming out, even during election year, where I'm also counting on rates to dip because of traditionally election year has rates dip. So it's also a good time if you're out there to leverage and hold on to 24. But there's a lot of people that will be in trouble just because we had such a sweet time and people were overpaying so much for properties and they were doing bridge debt. And that bridge debt, the rates is fluctuated so far up that they can't cover their debt. These deals out there. Stay patient. I agree with you. I can echo your statements, Jason, about double down on the operations. That's exactly what we're focusing on right now.
I just showed Rory an article very similar to what you just mentioned, where, it wasn't exactly the rates are jumping up on this bridge debt and that's causing a problem, but it was, it was that. And I showed you it last night, right? Rory?
Yeah. So, the expected turbulence in the multifamily market as adjustable rates start to really kick in and throw people's DSCR out of whack in the multifamily space, or certainly loans that have balloon payments and, refinance required. So there might be some turbulence ahead in the multifamily market, and there could be opportunities in that too.
Yeah. Hey, Noel, we asked 3 questions of all of our guests at the very end of each interview just to get to know you a little bit better and tie things up. They're really simple questions, and let's get into those right now. First one, if you get on stage for a half hour and talk about any subject in the world with zero preparation, what would that be?
Creative financing, real estate.
Mm-hmm. Not sprinting?
Not sprinting. Creative financing, real estate.
All right. Second question, tell us something, and this could be something you already talked about or something that we don't know yet. Tell us something that happened early in your life or career that impacts the way that you're working right now.
I didn't tell you already.
It could be something you already talked about. It could be your layoff or a track or anything.
Probably the layoff had the biggest thing that could really control my future. I still think about that all the time, and it's being really methodical. Yeah, being really methodical.
And I've had multiple layoffs throughout my career. I worked for 27 years and worked pretty successfully for a while. But isn't it crazy how you just can't get out of your head?
Yeah. And, it wasn't my last one. It was my first one that made such an impact on me. And I was just like, it still sticks to me.
I hear what you're saying, though, but not be able to control that narrative. That's probably the one little thing that I wish I could change with how those things went down. Because, in my most recent one, if I controlled the narrative, I would have been, figuring out a way to transition out of that job 3 months later. But I didn't have that control. But it worked out fine time-wise and financially, but still it was... You want to control your narrative. You said it early on in this interview. And that was one thing you took from that layoff, which I think is a brilliant piece of advice. If that happens to anyone who's listening or it's happened to you, figure out a way for that not to happen again, right? And you've done that. Last question we have, tell us something you're watching or reading or listening to these days. Anything in the world.
What am I watching? Succession. That's one of the shows right now. I love Succession. What I'm reading right now, Atomic Habits. So I'm actually rereading Atomic Habits right now. So I like to go back to some of the books I have. And I really
That's one of those reread books, right? You read it over and over. Yeah. I will date this episode. I am listening to Tina Turner right now. I was listening to a lot of her yesterday. So, fortunate that she passed. But those are some great ideas. I got a couple good I always get great book advice on this podcast. But I just told Rory to download a couple yesterday as well that I have to read through. One is the Disney book, Be Our Guest, which is, about it's about hospitality, but we have short-term rentals, and the STR business is both real estate and hospitality. I was told to read that book, so I'm going to do it.
It's big, and I think it's a lost art. We implement that within our group, and I did it as far as a culture. You want to have a culture of inclusiveness, so I always tell my property manager, it takes one thing. E-cards are free. They know, we already know their birth dates. You just treat them unlike a number. And just know, hey, this is whatever holidays, religion, just send an e-card out there. It goes a long way. And, this kind of making someone feel special, heads and beds.
Not just heads and beds. People feeling special, too. Butts and seats is what they say in the concert business. So, Noel, where can people find out more about you and Crown Capital if they want to reach out, learn more about you, learn about your investments, have questions about anything they heard in this podcast?
Yes, I can be found on LinkedIn at Noel Parnell. There's our website, Crown Capital. Crown Capital Corp is our .com is our web handle. And I'm actually getting more involved in social media right now. I've been a hermit for the last 15 years, and you have to adapt or you die. So I need to get more into the social media side and more exposure. My partners are doing great at that. I kind of always been in the shadows, like, how can I film something when I'm actually just working? So I need to get better there. But I'm getting better at my social media. I don't want to be an old man kind of like in my ways. So I need to get with the times.
You're like, I'm doing the work. Like, I don't have to show everyone how to do the work or that I'm doing the work. But yeah, no, we totally understand that. We're going to link all that up in the show notes. By the way, LinkedIn is social media, just so you know. So you love that. You're already doing social media. You don't have to do TikTok dancing on social media, but if you want to, on LinkedIn, but I guess if you want to, you can. Awesome. Rory, where can people get a hold of you or learn more about you?
It's easiest to find me through my businesses. So my real estate brokerage is Next Home Titletown. That's nexthometitletown.com. Or my law practice is Urban Village Legal. That's urbanvillagelegal.com.
All right. I'm Jason at nexthometitletown.com. If you have questions about this episode or you want to be on the podcast or you have anything that you want me to pass along to Noel, you can find him on LinkedIn, but he's very easy to find. I found you many months ago once we booked this interview. If you're in Philly, go find Noel. He's around town, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love talking real estate. So anytime I love talking real estate. So.
Oh, I can tell. Hey, by the way, there's only one person without a biology degree on this call, and that's Rory. He's the attorney, but I got one of those too. So, but unlike you, I did nothing with it. Like, I didn't even go into the science. I went to media instead. But it's always great talking to another science brain like yourself.
Wow.
So, hey, Noel, thanks so much for all your time today. Thanks for being on the podcast, and thanks for moving through the technical issues and finding your way back. Like the science brain that you are, you're like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure out my computer. And I wish you the best at the Apple Store in getting your phone repaired.
I appreciate you having me on.
And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, please give us a 5-star rating or drop a comment in the comment field. We read all those, and we're happy to respond. That's it. That's another great episode of the Real Estate Law Podcast, and we will see you next time.
This has been the Real Estate Law Podcast. Because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. We're powered by Next Home Titletown, Greater Boston's progressive real estate brokerage. More at nexthometitletown.com. And Urban Village Legal, Massachusetts Real Estate Council, serving savvy property owners, lenders, and investors. More at urbanvillagelegal.com. Today's conversation was not legal advice, but we hope you found it entertaining and informative. Discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.